Take off the space blanket. Thank you.
Welcome to Clay on Film, a series where I reverse engineer ceramics from movies and TV. Today's case, Better Call Saul, Season 1, Episode 2, Chuck McGill's coffee mugs. Take off the space blanket. This style of mug just screams 1970s American diner. It looks thick and heavy, so it would stand up to long days of abuse and industrial dishwashers. Now, on the surface we don't see much. Chuck's mug is brown, it's shiny with a slight curve up top and a rounded bottom. Using Jimmy's hand as a size reference, the mug doesn't look that big, and the handle just fits 2 fingers comfortably. Every piece of pottery begins with the clay. I need to make some deductions about Chuck's mug based just on the way it looks and how I know it's being used. For a diner mug like this, I need something that's going to fire to be very dense and not absorb any water. I'll use a smooth white stoneware. This will match the clay that's visible on the foot ring of the cup. Of course, I'll start by wedging my clay. Wedging the clay helps me get a nice homogeneous mixture, gets rid of any air bubbles, distributes all of the moisture in the clay evenly, and to me, it really lets me get acquainted with my clay before throwing with it. I'll get a sense of how wet or dry it is, and that way I don't have any surprises when I sit down at the wheel. This clay from Sibelco, WM2502, is going to be a perfect choice for making Chuck's mug. Then I'll weigh out balls of clay for each piece that I'm going to make. Now these mugs are going to be nice and thick, and that means I'm starting out with a greater amount of clay than I ordinarily would for a mug this size. I'm weighing out 500 grams, over a pound. You'll be able to bang it around on countertops all day and not have any problems. And importantly for Chuck, it's going to feel really stable and secure and rock solid. Correct clay chosen and everything prepped, it's time to throw. I'll start just by centering and opening the clay. And I'm going to open this nice and deep because this has a really small foot ring, so I don't want a super thick bottom. And I'll try to get this nice and flat. So I'll open this a bit wider than I actually want the final piece to be, so that now when I pull up on the walls, I can push them back in. And that keeps everything nice and orderly. And I am going to leave these walls nice and thick, but I need to get this a little bit taller than the finished piece is going to be, because I'm going to shape it, and that's going to make it come outward and shrink a little bit. And then of course in the firing, it's also going to shrink. So I'll make this a little bit bigger so that I have a little bit of room to play with. Okay, so I'll take a little bit of clay from the bottom and bring that up. Kind of releasing pressure around here so I don't thin out the walls too much up top. That looks about good. With just my fingertip, I'm just going to push this out just a little bit. Okay. And I'm going to define that a little bit more when I trim after this is dried up a little bit. My hands are a little bit too fat, so I squished my rim there. With the size and shape of the bottom defined, now I can move on to the top. The top part of this mug has a nice gentle curve. It's nothing dramatic, but it's definitely there. It's kind of the first thing you notice about the mug is that shape, that gentle curve. I'm just gonna very gently press the clay out to meet this metal rib, which has a nice curve to it, and bring them both up and bring the rim out just a little bit there. Okay. Now Chuck's mug looks like the rim is the same diameter as the base. So right now this is a bit too narrow. So I'm just gonna do the same thing and just bring that curve out a little bit more. Because I'm making this sort of in the spirit of a mass-produced commercial mug, there shouldn't really be a lot of maker's marks left behind. So my fingers on the inside leave a bunch of lines. So I'm going to use this same metal rib to remove those lines just like I did on the outside. So I'm going to try to leave the inside and the outside relatively smooth. Okay. The foot ring and the rim are the easiest things to chip, just moving it around, tossing it in the sink or whatever. So a nice thick rim means it's much less likely to chip and break. And we just wire it off. Okay. After that is firmed up for a day, it's ready to trim. I trim my mugs on a leather hard chuck. That keeps the piece firmly in place and it ensures that the rim stays round. So I'll quickly tap center that, and then I'm ready to make this little foot. I typically use the same tools for all of my trimming. So I'll use one of these tools, which are super common, and that helps me get kind of the general shape of the foot. And then I also use this Mud Tools Do-All Trim tool, which I really like. It's made of steel, you can resharpen it. It's got a nice little curve to it, so it helps for getting a nice smooth curve trimmed, whereas sometimes the other tools tend to really leave a lot of lines behind. Once I have carved this foot, and remember it's really a small foot on Chuck's mug, I'm going to use a rubber rib to smooth everything out nicely. This not only makes sure that it feels nice, but it also makes sure that there's no coarseness on the bottom to scratch up a wooden tabletop. I burnish every piece I make just like this. It leaves behind really smooth clay that's pleasant to touch and makes it actually even more resistant to absorbing water. While the piece is leather hard, it's also the right time to add a handle. I'm going to start by pulling a handle. Basic idea is I'm going to roll out a bit of a log here and then keep it wet and just apply very, very gentle pressure. And that pressure is just enough to coax the clay a little bit thinner and a little bit longer. Looking at Chuck's mug, we can just make out some of the details of the handle itself. It looks like it has a slight spine here along the middle of the backside of the handle. You can also tell that it's somewhat flat. It's a little bit wider in one direction than the other. Season 6, Episode 4, and Episode 5. And now these same mugs make an appearance, wouldn't you know it, in a diner. But here the lighting is even better and we get this really great close-up. Now this is a pretty straightforward looking handle. It's kind of C-shaped with those visible attachments. You can see right where it was stuck on. It wasn't smooth and blended out. And that means I need a nice firm attachment with no fussing about. I have to just make the handle, boom, stick it on. And then it has this little notch up top where the thumb contacts. And then a little bit of scoring on the mug, a bit of scoring on the handle, a little bit of slip, and a little shimmy back and forth to lock those two pieces together with a nice firm pressure, making sure to support from the inside so I don't deform the cup. And when all of this dries, that's going to be a connection as strong as any part of the cup. I'll clean up the slip that is squished out from the sides and kind of smooth those edges with a little rubber tip. And that's all I need to do for that handle. All right, so this cup is out of the bisque firing. The clay is sintered and it's ready for glazing. The most striking visual feature of this glaze is the amazing gloss. I mean, look how perfectly smooth and defect-free it is. It just sparkles brilliantly. The chemistry of the glaze affects the surface quality. I'm going to have to do a whole battery of glaze tests to find the chemistry that's going to give me this perfect look. I develop all of my glaze recipes on Glazing because I can keep track of the ingredients, the chemistries, and photos. Glazing also shows where the chemistry falls on this thing called the Stoll graph or the Stoll chart. I mixed up glaze tests that spread across a wide area. The idea is to find a glaze that's going to have the most perfect surface quality. You can check out all of these tests and the chemistries of them on my Glazing account. In all of these recipes, I'm adding the same exact amount of red iron oxide. That's literally just really pure rust. It's going to give that classic brown color. Plus, iron is cheap, it's non-toxic, and it's very reliable. So it's perfect for this kind of mug that needs to be mass-produced, cost-effective, and very durable. I've made a lot of glazes with iron oxide, so I already know that 10% is a good amount of iron oxide to give me this shade of brown that I'm looking for here. So here are the test results. Without the iron oxide, all of these would just be a clear glaze with no color. But with the exact same percentage of red iron oxide, you can see how the color actually varies quite a bit between the different tests. This test is perfect. It has no bubbles, no streaks, no crazing, no defects at all. Just what you would expect from a diner mug like this. If I were making a big batch of these mugs, I'd mix up a big 5-gallon bucket of glaze and just dip them straight in there. But because I'm just making a few of these, I'm only going to mix a small amount, which does make applying the glaze a little bit more challenging. But I'll go ahead and dunk the outside and then clean up the foot quickly with a little wet sponge, making sure that anything that's going to be touching the inside of the kiln is absolutely free of glaze. Pour the inside and pour that out, and it's a pretty good coating of glaze. And now, into the kiln. And here it is. Chuck from Better Call Saul gets his coffee mug. So there you have it. Thanks for watching the first installment of Clay on Film. I hope to make a lot more of these in the future, so please let me know in the comments what movies or shows have interesting ceramics that you'd like to know more about and see remade. I liked making Chuck's mug so much that it inspired me to make my own version. So instead of brown, this actually has a black glaze that is somewhat matte with these gold crystals. It's a little bit lighter. I think the handle is more comfortable. But apart from being a little bit more handmade, I think I prefer Chuck's mug. There's just something so satisfying and nostalgic about this rich brown glossy glaze. It's really hard to improve on. I really enjoyed this. I hope you did too. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you here for the next installment of Clay on Film. Take off the space blanket. Great. And now one more for the Tinker and Think cut. Take off the space blanket. And cut.